Okay, I've had a couple of t-shirts in my wardrobe for the past 2 years that I have hardly ever worn. I don't even know why I bought them. And this one I even spent time painting a flower on it because I got bleach on it one night. So anyhow, I never wear them because they're baggy. Very attractive, aren't they? Look. So I'm going to crop them and shorten the sleeves as well. So you can see already it looks so much better. I've shortened it quite a bit. I think I'll curve it up. I've just pinned it roughly. I'm just going to curve it up slightly at the side seams and take a little bit in, and also shorten the sleeves as well, a bit of an angle. But it looks better straight away, doesn't it? Actually, I quite like the pink and brown together. I think it's a great color combination. So this is where I had the pins marked for the finish of my hem, and I'm just going to take in the side seam slightly on the sides here, but I won't touch the bust area at all. And then I've got to add a hem allowance on the bottom, and I'll of course leave a little bit of a seam allowance there. So I've pinned everything. I've pinned the underarms together exactly seam on seam. I've also pinned the shoulders together at the top of the armhole, seam on seam. And this is where I'm going to be cutting, well, I'm going to cut the sleeve to about here because it'll have a hem on it, and I'm just bringing the sleeve from the underarm. I'm leaving a hem here, and then I turn back, and then I'll cut it around about there like that. So I'll make it a little bit more of a slightly baggy cap sleeve. So let's add our hem allowance and start cutting. Now I work in metric, but I'll be adding around about 2.5 an inch hem onto this. I'll just mark it 2.5, 1, 2. Oh, I should do it properly so you can see clearly. 2.5. Now, because this is not a pointed hem, it's a curved hem slightly, so always square out, so you don't end up with a point at the bottom of your center front, unless that's what you want. Just draw in the line. It's probably better to use chalk. I just use pencil for everything. Okay, and then I've got to add a bit of a seam allowance, a 1 centimeter seam allowance here at the side seams. I'll unpick this section here. Now, as it's coming in like this, it's coming on an angle. It's not coming straight, and also my hem's not straight either. It's slightly curved. So in this case, there'll be a notch there, a little mark there for the turn back. I'm going to turn back on this angle. So when it turns back on this angle, this will end up over here. This point will end up here, and so I have to, you should be measuring it out properly. I'm just doing it roughly because it's knit. But the hem will extend out like this, so that when it folds back, it will meet up with this line here. It'll be more like that actually. So what you should do really is put your set square. That's why set squares with a center line like this are invaluable. And always get, you know, a bigger set square the better. Those little ones are no good. So you put that line right on the hem line there, and measure out 2.5, which is that point there, and that's exactly where your hem should be finishing, the fold back should be finishing. So really I've got it a little bit, I have to bring it back here like this. Okay, so let's start cutting. One thing I will mention is when you try and lay out your t-shirt, you know, like I've got this exactly seam on seam here, but quite often, especially in cheaper t-shirts, if you want to shorten a big baggy t-shirt and it's one of the sort of the cheaper ones, it probably won't sit like this. In fact, most of the time it'll probably be sitting like, if you're trying to get seam on seam, it's going to be all twisted. It's just the nature of how cottons and cotton knits are made on a circular machine. But the more expensive, like this was quite an expensive t-shirt. It was made in China, but it was a Japanese company, and it is a good quality t-shirt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it over like this, because I just want this to be a fast job. So I can cut both the back and the front together. And again, if it's a really, really high quality t-shirt and it's for women only, you might find that your front is bigger than your back, which is how it should be. But most t-shirts won't be. It'll just be, the back and the front will be the same measurement. Okay, so I'm just going to fold it out. I'm going to start cutting. Where my hem extends out. I'm just cutting it up there because I'm going to unpick that part and then I'm going to cut up properly so that it's a straight line. Normally if this was a woven fabric you would notch in there. If it was, you know, if the hem just came straight down like this, you don't need to, because you can see where it's going to fold up. Okay, and try and avoid notching into knits if you can, because they will run. And even if you do have a woven fabric, and when you notch in, you only ever notch in just a fraction like that. Okay, don't go right into the seam because you'll have a big problem and your seam will come undone. Okay, so I'm just going to unpick this section here and get inside to cut it properly. So I'll try and show you really closely how to unpick an overlock seam. This is actually a 4-thread because you've got that extra row in there. It's classed as a safety stitch machine, and it's been very well sewn. It's quite firm, so it's not as easy as what some of them are quite loose. So you have to get into, you can see you can get into that loop there and cut it. And lift it again a bit further down and then bring it up and then start pulling through. As I said, this is quite firm, so it doesn't come as easy as what some of them do. Some of them come out quite fast. I might have to cut this one. So this is the first thread to come out. So that's come out. And then you can pull this one out here, and again it's getting that loop, okay? So if you can be patient, you can see the whole thing comes undone. Okay. Here you can see I've unpicked that section of the armhole and also the underarm, and I've just laid all the seams on top of one another like that there, and I've pinned them in position. My underarm seam, my armhole seam there, all seam on seam. So if I took it back up to where I was going to originally, it's still a little bit messy, so I've brought it in a little bit. I mean, it's quite a baggy t-shirt, and this is my new cut line. I'm bringing it into the armhole, and I'm going to make my underarm of my sleeve a little bit tighter as well. Now this is going to be the new hem turn back position, so I'll extend out the sleeve for the turn back here like this. It might be too much, but it's better than not having it there at all. And then I'll just mark the position of 2.5. It's actually coming into the current hem, so I can unpick that little section anyhow. So let's cut our new side seam. Also, don't ever throw, if you've got big scraps like this left over, don't ever throw them away, because they might come in useful for something else. You might need to, I mean, in this case I'll have to test the tension on the machine to make sure the machine tension is correct. And you never know, these pieces come in handy for all sorts of things later on. So I'm not worried about these here. This is the underarm of the sleeve, and I'm cutting the hem turn back. This underarm of the sleeve. Oh, it's quite thick. Oh dear. I should have ironed these out. Always make sure your shears are really sharp. It makes life a lot easier. Okay, it's all fairly clean. I might make a mark. That's the hem turn back position. I won't notch it, I'll just mark it with pencil or chalk. Okay, so let's unpick that. It's my new hem. So when you do so, in this instance, I want my side seam to go sharp at the sides, my hem to curve up sharp and finish sharply at the sides. So I'll do the front hem first, I'll do the back hem, and then I'll sew these together so that it ends up sharp. But I mean, you might like yours curved, in which case you'll sew your side seam first, then turn it up, and when you do your hem, it's a bit difficult to show without it actually being sewn, but imagine your side seam's already stitched together. This will be curved like that. Okay, I'll show you after I've sewn it. Okay, I'm now going to shorten the sleeves. Okay, so I've laid out the sleeve and I've pinned the armholes together, everything seam on seam. This is the front and this is the back of the shirt, and because I don't have a piece of paper and I just have to work with a bit of a variable here, trying to get so that this area is a little bit straight so I don't end up curving my sleeve around to a point. So I've just sort of measured, it's about just over 7 centimeters, and I've just drawn a straight line, and I'm going to make my sleeve turn back the hem only about 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch, because it's a curve, and the wider the hem is, the more difficult it is to turn back because it's going to twist badly. So I've only done half the sleeve. I've just drawn very roughly, and then I'll fold it over and get the same cut for the back of the sleeve. Actually, something I wanted to show you just before I finish cutting. You can probably actually see how the grain is swinging off there. It's not parallel to the hem of the sleeve, and that's the problem with t-shirts or, you know, circular knits. They quite often go off grain, and they're cut off grain. They're quite difficult to cut sometimes in production. So that's just over the halfway point, so let's fold it in half. Take that pin out, we don't need it anymore. Let's match it up there with the back underarm. So these are the important points here. It's just the underarm because that's where it's going to sew back to, stitch on. Make sure everything's nice and clean underneath. Okay, let's cut that. Okay, so this is all the cutting done. Now I'm ready to press the hems and restitch. Might be a little bit crooked in places. Okay, let's sew. As I mentioned before, this is the problem you have with cotton knits, you know, because it's a circular knit, and you know, like this is, as I said, this is not an expensive t-shirt, but it's also not a cheap one either. And so you can see the grain line. This is the hem of the t-shirt here, but you can see the grain line coming. This is the weft grain, and it's coming up here like this. And then what happens is it causes this twist like this usually. This was like this. I've actually, what I do quite often after I've washed my t-shirts, because they always go back, the twist, is I get it under steam, or I'll steam it heavily first, and then I'll just stretch it like this to try and get my t-shirt straight again. And it becomes, the hems become a little bit more noticeable, especially in this instance, because I'm cutting and I'm curving my hem, so I'm going to have my side seam swinging around. It's not so noticeable on baggy t-shirts. So I'm about to lay on the front of my shirt to use it as a pattern, and use it as a template to cut the hem of this t-shirt. Actually, what I'll do is I'll fold it and do it properly. Here you can see how it wants to sit naturally without any twisting, but the armholes are not sitting on top of one another, and the hem is sitting up here. So I have to force it like this here, so you have to twist it. It's, as I said, this is not one of the worst ones, but some of them are shockers, and you have to start twisting. And when you finish your garment, then just use some steam on it. But it's never going to sit perfectly. This is just one of the frustrating things about circular knit cottons. That's the best I'll get it. And I'm going to use I was really lucky because this was a much bigger t-shirt, so I didn't have to worry about unpicking anything. I just literally cut the side seams off. I think it was a size bigger than my pink t-shirt. So I'm just making sure that the length is about the same. There's my armhole. It's still a bit bigger. Oh, just as well, because I need to extend this piece out for the hem, so okay. That's the front. Let's do the back. And now to cut the sleeve. So I've just made sure that the seams are all sitting on top of one another. Then I'll fold it over to make sure the underarms are running the same, front and back. So I've got a little bit bigger on the one side here. Make sure they're all the same. And this is where the twisting of the fabric can play havoc. But as I said, it's cotton knit, so it's a bit forgivable. You wouldn't be able to do this with a woven. You'd have to do it properly. If it was a woven and you had a curved armhole like this with a deep hem, you would have to have a separate facing, because a woven fabric will not that shorter distance will not turn back into a wider distance. Okay, I have 2 t-shirts to sew now. So I'm just pinning my hem up, ready to steam before I actually sew it. And the sleeve hem is only 2 centimeters. Probably even less would probably be better, but we'll have a look. So 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch, or even half an inch. I like a deeper hem on my clothes. 2 centimeters. So I'm only just fitting it into the underarm there. So you see, because it's stretchy, I can get it to sit perfectly. But if it was woven, this would not stretch. Okay. Okay, so a day later, and this is the blue one altered. Looks much nicer, doesn't it? Okay, back again with the pink t-shirt finished. And as you can see, I've painted a cheetah. And I have to show you the back as well, okay? I am about cheetah conservation. But anyhow, I'm really happy with both of my t-shirts. I'm happy with the length, and then I've curved it up at the sides, and I've taken just a fraction off the side seams just to bring it in a little bit at the hem. I didn't want to keep that baggy long look because I never wore it like that anyhow. And also, when you're taking up a hem on a knit fabric, and if you've got a domestic machine with a decorative stitch, try and use that as opposed to a plain sewer with 2 rows of stitching, because you have to keep those rows perfectly straight, or otherwise even a couple of centimeters crooked hits you in the eye. But also the seam tends to bubble. Even when you steam it, it tends to bubble more with a plain sewer because of the feed underneath, you know, especially on an industrial machine. They're quite strong, so it's better to try and use a domestic, which I did in this case, with a decorative stitch. Hope I'm not complicating things here. But if you'd like to know anything, you know, about the process, or you'd like to know anything about skirts or pattern cutting or anything like that, have a look at my Skillshare classes, or either just message me. I'm happy. I look into my YouTube channel every few days, so I'll get back to you. But it'd be interesting to know what you think. But it's a much more flattering look, isn't it, than big baggy t-shirts. Doesn't matter if you're a skinny or a curvy. A curved line and, you know, a little bit more figure hugging is much more flattering and complimentary. Bye.